Hi there, welcome to this special session. In this session, in this particular video, I'm going to show you how to prepare a simple cash budget. Let us use this information that we have here. We're looking at a company that has a sales of 10,000 in February, and these sales are expected to grow at 7% a month. 20% of the sales will be received immediately, cash on or check on delivery. Then 30% will be received a month after and 50% 2 months after. The inventory purchases are 50% of the following month's sales. The manpower fixed cost is 20% of sales, and the loan repayments 2,000 per month. Indeed, this seems pretty complicated. But with Excel, it is not complicated. So let us use Excel. With Excel, it's like a store. And so we're going to arrange the figures bit by bit. So let us demonstrate how we can do it in Excel. So in February, we said the sale was 10,000. So we can put 10,000 there. Now each month, the sale increases by 7%. So if we highlight all of that in August and then use the round function so that we round it to 0 decimal place, we can take that figure, which is 10, multiply that by 1.07. We round it to 0 decimal places and press Ctrl Enter. In one hit, we've actually calculated the sales increase. So you can see that this has increased by 7%, hence 10,700. And this has increased over days by 7%, and that has increased, and so on and so forth. Once we've done that, notice we are preparing cash budget from April to July. So we are mainly interested in these 4 columns, April to July. So if we begin with the amount of cash received, we go into April there. So there, the cash received is 20%. Let us again highlight April to July and then do the round function that we just done. We take the April, multiply that by 20% to 0 decimal places, again Ctrl Enter. So automatically, we have taken 20% of the sales in each month. Then in the following month, we're going to take 30% of the previous month's sales rather than the same month. So again, we're going to highlight this using the round function, round, but this time remember to select the previous month, multiply that by 30%, which is 0.3 to 0 decimal places, again, Ctrl Enter. So you can see this is now 3210, 323435, which is basically 30% of that figure. And this is 30% of April, and this one is 30% of May, and finally 30% of June. The final bit is 50% 2 months, so that's 2 months ago. Again, we're going to highlight that, and that will be equals to round, open bracket, we pick up that figure, and then multiply that by 0.5 into 0 decimal places, and Ctrl Enter. So we have actually taken 50% of that and 50% of that. Now we can calculate our total cash collection, which is the sum of all of that. So the total cash collection will be all of those added together, which is 10,500, 11,235, 12,022, and 12,862. We've got the total cash. All we now need is the total payments. For the total payments, we start with purchases. Remember, we are told that inventory purchases are 50% of the following month's sales. So this will be 50% of May. That's the purchases in April. And so for May will be 50% of June. So let's do that. Again, we're going to use the round function, which is that. But this time, because we are in April, we pick up the May sale times 0.5, 50%, and then close bracket, Ctrl Enter. So you can see with Excel how easy it is to prepare cash flow statements. The manpower or the manpower cost is 20% of sales. Again, fairly straightforward, equals to the round function, open bracket, pick up the sales for April, and we multiply that by 10 to 20% to 0 decimal places, and Ctrl Enter. Finally, the loan, that is already given, which is £2,000 per month. So we just basically put 2,000 or there. The next thing we need to do is to also get the sum of the total payments. So the sum of the total payments will be the sum of all of this put together, which is 10,415, 11,004, and so on and so forth. Once we've done that, we are now in a position to work out the net cash flows. The net cash flows, of course, is the total collections minus the total payments, and that gives us the net cash flows. In April is 85, in May 231, 387, and 553, which is great, but not good enough. It is great because we know what the actual net cash flow is throughout, and so we've cleaned this up now. In fact, this is nice, but the problem we have is that it's not reflecting the cash position that we have. So we need to know what the final cash position is. To do that, we normally follow this, which is to take the opening cash balance, add to that the total collections, we less the total payments to give us the net cash flows, the unadjusted cash flows, and then we bring in the borrowing. So if we make the assumption that the beginning cash flow is 20,000, so let's make that assumption now. So if we say the beginning cash flow is 20,000, which is that figure, then we can work out the unadjusted cash balance, which is simply the beginning cash flow plus the net cash flows. So we can copy that across. So the beginning cash flow is basically the figure of net cash flow, which is the beginning cash flow plus net cash flow. Let us first assume that the loans are 0 for now. We'll come back to that later. So that means we now have an ending cash flow, which is the unadjusted cash flows plus the loan, if any. So in this case, there is no loan. So that makes it the same. Now, as you can see, this figure is the same as that because we have not yet worked out what the opening cash flow is for May. So to do that is fairly straightforward. The opening cash flow for May is the closing cash flow for April. If we press Ctrl Enter, we have now worked out our cash flow statements. As you can see, we know what the cash position is in April, which is 20,085. We know the cash position in May, 2315. So gradually our cash is growing up to 21,256 in July. And that is a basic cash flow statement, which is great, which looks really nice. Are we done there? Not quite. We're not done. As nice as this looks like, cash flow statement, Excel can give us a lot more functionality than simply what we have done so far. Now, the problem we have here is the assumptions are coded in. They are coded in. But for Excel, we don't have to code the assumptions in, because without coding them in, we will be able to do what-if analysis. As it stands, we just cannot do what-if analysis. So let us take out the numbers that we have inserted and use the formulas so that we can undertake a what-if analysis. Let's do that by looking at slide 2 data, which is this data. What I need to do now is to create an assumption session. So here you've got a 7% assumption for sales growth, and the initial sales was 10,000. The beginning cash flow was 20,000. Don't worry about the minimal cash flow for now. We'll come back to that shortly. The cash on delivery was 20%. And the following month is 30%, and 2 months after is 50%. Again, don't worry about delivery charge for now. The invoice was 50% of the following period, and manpower and purchase was 20%. The loan repayment was 2,000. So we've got this assumption section that we can now refer to. Let us now recreate the cash flow statement again, this time using formulas all the way. To start with, we open up with the sales figure, which is fairly straightforward. instead of typing it in, we refer to that initial sales of 10,000. That's it, equals to that cell. And that is it. The next thing we did was to increase this by 7%. So how do we do that here? Again, the same thing there. If we use a round function, so we say round, and then we click on this one, we then multiply that by open bracket 1 plus the growth rate. We close the bracket and round it to 0 decimal place, Control Enter. I'm not sure what happens there. Oh, okay, I know what happened. Let's try that again. Because I did not fix that function, so I need to fix this there. So I cannot copy that across. Now you can see it gave me value because I didn't fix it on this cell. So every time Excel moves, it was moving to the next. And that was why I had that error message. But by fixing it to that cell, which is $B1, $3, which is this, it will always refer to it. If you go back to that, you notice it's referring to that. And we now have exactly the same sales as we had before. So basically, the same answers we've got before is what we have now. The next thing is for us to work out the cash on delivery, and we are working from April to July. So if we highlight all of that, we simply say round, open bracket, that figure times 0.2 that's figure times 0.2, so that is 2290. As we did before, we need to take 30% of that. Oh, let's start again. Apologies. So you got equals to round, open bracket, that figure, multiply that by 20%. Again, we fix that function F4 or F4 to 0 decimal places, and is the same answer. The next one is the previous month. So again, round, open bracket, we pick that, multiply that by this one, which is 20%, and we must remember to fix that as well. Function F4 to 0 decimal places. And again, is always referring to that. And finally, this must refer to that, which again is equals to round, open bracket, you click on that, multiply that by, again, you click on that cell, remember to fix it to 0 decimal place, Control Enter. So as you can see, it is 5% of that and 5% of this. So effectively, we can now add this together, which is equals to sum, all of that, sum of that, Control Enter, and it is like before, which is the total collections. In terms of purchases, if you remember, purchases was 50% of the next period there, 50%. So again, as we did before, is round, open bracket, we are going to the next month, and we multiply that by 50%, which is here. We must remember to fix it to 0 decimal place. Okay, so, and in terms of manpower, the manpower is 20%. So again, it's round. You select the current year's sales, multiply that by this, which is the manpower. Remember to fix it into 0 decimal place. And the loan is fairly straightforward. The loan is equal to that figure, which is there, and don't forget to fix it. So we are referring all the time to that place for loan. So now we can add this up to get the sum. The sum of that is 11. And we can now work out the net cash flows, the net cash flow being the total collections minus total payment, which is exactly the same as we had before. The unadjusted cash balance comes in when we bring in the opening cash balance, and the opening cash balance is here, which is that figure there. And therefore, the unadjusted cash balance is simply the same as the opening cash balance plus the net cash flow. And that is it. As for now, we're ignoring the loan. We'll come to that shortly. And therefore, we now have our closing cash balance, which is basically this, plus the loan, which is that answer. Now, to complete our cash flow, we need to bring in the opening cash balance for the previous month, and we're done. So as you can see, it's exactly the same answer as we had before, which is 21,256. Now, the beauty of doing this, what's the difference? What's the beauty of doing this? Now, this gives us the opportunity to undertake what we call what-if analysis. Supposing that sales has increased to 11%, what is going to be the impact on our cash budget? Let's do that. We just simply increase that to 11% and look at that. Our cash budget, our cash has dropped to 19,000 from 21,000. If the opening cash balance is only £1,000 instead of 20,000, look at the impact on our cash budget. Now, the problem we have here is that we are starting to make a what-if analysis. We can change any of this and we'll get different results. But we can build this further. So as you can see from here, all the numbers in the cash budget rely on these assumptions. So we can easily see what happens if we grow the sales by 11%, as I've mentioned, and of course the manpower cost increases to 25%. There's manpower cost, increase that to 25%, and immediately we see what happens to our cash budget, which is there. However, the issue we have here is this, that we have got an amount which needs to be borrowed. We need to borrow this amount, otherwise there's a problem happening here. So how then do we take care of that to make sure that if there's a deficit here, we borrow the amount to cover the deficit? To cover that, we just need an if function, a formula called if. So we simply say if, open bracket, which is an if function, this figure. If that figure is less than 0, which of course it is, then if it is less than 0, then borrow the figure. So you borrow it. So minus means you borrow that figure. If not, leave it. So this is the if function. Look at the logical test. Test it, the value if true, then the value is false. So if it is less than 0, you borrow that figure. Otherwise, don't do anything. So let's close that function and press enter. As you can see, all of a sudden, we are borrowing these figures to cater for, to make sure that we don't have a negative cash balance. Now, this is the beauty of having cash budget. We can do a lot more than this. For example, we can decide to maintain a minimal cash balance. If we want to maintain a minimal cash balance of say £1,000, how then are we going to do that? So all we need to do is to change this formula slightly, the borrowing formula. In order to maintain a minimal cash balance, we must borrow the difference. So let me change it to say equals if this figure, if that figure is less than the amount that we need, the minimal cash balance, then we must borrow. We must borrow that amount. Yeah, we must borrow that amount plus that figure. Sorry, minus that figure, because it's a minus figure. Minus is plus. So basically what we are saying here is that if this figure is less than 1,000, then we must borrow that amount plus 1,000, because this is minus. 1,000 plus that figure to give us the amount. Otherwise, we do nothing. Let us see what happens now if we put that formula there. Now, as you can see, they change. We've borrowed 1,224, and that simply means that we have now borrowed this figure. And so we now have £1,000 here because we've borrowed that. Okay. So in effect, every time we are testing to see if it is more than that. Let me see. If it is more than that, we can do the same here. If it is less than that, again we test it to see if it is less, then we borrow it. So I should have done all of them in one go. If again we take this figure, if it is less than 1,000, then borrow 1,000. Start again. Let me do the calculation all in one go. So equals to, if this figure is less than 1,000, let's fix that. If it is less than 1,000, then borrow 1,000, which is that figure. We must remember to fix it. Borrow 1,000 minus that figure. Otherwise, do nothing. So in effect, we are testing to see if this is less than 1,000. If it is, we borrow it. Otherwise, we don't. Let's see what happens now. Now, as you can see, we've been able to maintain 1,000 all the way through. In this instance, this is less than 1,000, so we need to borrow 1,000 plus that, which is 124. So that way we are able to maintain 1,000. And the same applies here, and there, and there. Now, with this kind of scenario, we can begin to build something else into it, because when you borrow money, you're going to have to pay interest. So let us assume that you pay interest on new loan of 1%. So if you pay interest on new loan of 1%, then it means you have to you have to repay the amount you borrow plus interest on that. So we need now to change this formula slightly. So how do we change it? We simply say that is equals to that figure, which is that figure, the next one, plus the interest on the money that we have borrowed. The interest on this borrowed amount, which is that figure here that we borrowed last year, multiply that by the interest of that. We must fix that interest, otherwise the answers will be different. And that is it. So in effect, every time we borrow, we are now paying interest on the borrowed fund. Now that is neat, very neat, and the formula is given there. You can see that I've done that, and we can play around with this. So this is an amazing thing. We not only accomplish the sales at 7% growth, 20% of this, but we also did more. We also did what if scenarios, what if analysis. We also took care of borrowing requirements, maintenance of a minimum sum, and also the effects of interest. So finally, let us see what happens if we change our assumptions. Supposing this is now 38%, and this one still is 10,000, but the beginning cash flow is now 10,010. 10,010. The minimum cash we are looking for is 10,000, and the everything else is the same, 30%, but this is now 25%. And 1%. Notice what has happened. Immediately, everything has changed. And the system does it for us automatically, simply by changing this around. I hope that this has been of use to you. But of course, you will not have to go this far in your coursework. But this is to explain the importance of using Excel to do cash budget. If you have any issues with this presentation, feel free to contact me and I'll be more than happy to help. Thank you for listening, and see you soon. Bye-bye for now.